I would like to continue on the things that we were talking about concerning the higher self, but to understand the higher self and how it's integrated into our day-to-day world, it's important that we understand the bodies that we've been talking about. Now, I was saying in the privacy of my home that in my spirit, it didn't seem like everyone was really getting it. And so it came clear that everyone is not necessarily getting the bodies. So what we're going to do today, hopefully we're going to step back and lay a foundation down so we could understand that part a little bit more. And it's always great whenever we don't understand something to actually voice it. And I would encourage everyone to do that. If we're in a certain place and there are certain things that we don't understand, please, we shouldn't feel that, well, if I say something, I feel I'm going to feel different than the next person. We're here to try to move forward. And in moving forward, we want to make sure that everyone actually is getting whatever is being said. If it's not being gotten or we can't get it, then I understand that. All the efforts have been made, and if we don't get it at that point, then maybe the Father doesn't want it at that point. But everyone should feel comfortable about voicing if something is not clear. That's, we want to make sure that we do that. So today we want to back up a little bit and kind of lay a foundation, or lay again a thicker foundation, if you will, on the bodies that we have been speaking about. And so what I want to come from is an area that we had gone to before, and this is how the creation has come together and how the same creation that's above has come down into our earth today in this physical world. And of course, we went over it so many times. As the Father has life within himself, this is Source Father, and the life that Source Father has within himself, we look at it as the Spirit, or wisdom, that was there with the Father before anything had come, but that was in the Father. And so the Father brought forth an only begotten Son. Now, if we look at it as an only begotten Son, then there is nothing else. There's only that Son. But what the Father is doing with the Son is creating his body. Now, in the ancient world, I would say 3,000 years ago, even 2,000 years ago, people would start a family. Let's say Abraham had a son named Midian, which he did. And Midian, he sent them off to the east, and Midian had started a family. Well, that family became a village or a tribe or a land that Midian, the name of Midian was on, but Midian had already died and moved on. But the Midianites had the genes pool of Midian and Midian's wife coming down into all the children. Now let's say Midian only had one child, which he didn't, but let's say he only had one child. And he was going to build that vast tribe or village that his name was going to be on. He would have had one begotten son, but then the creation of the village or the tribe or the body, after he had that one begotten son, it wouldn't be coming through him anymore. The building of that body or his village or his tribe would be coming from his begotten son, which is only one. It's not many he would have. So it would be coming from that only begotten son. Now in our scriptures, it tells us that nothing was done outside of this only begotten son. And it would be the same case with Midian. In order for Midian's body to move forward and for a builder of that family characteristics and name, his son, who would be just one, would have to be the one that would be doing it. So of course Source could do anything, but we have to look at what Source said happened. So we have to look at the inspired words that are written. And if source said I could do everything and I did something else, then that's fine. That's what we did. But if source said we all live and have our being in source and the creation came out of the only begotten Son, well, that's what we have to go on. There's no other place to go. Now, unless we see more. Now, in that, we have to remember we live and have our being in source, and source also lives in us. Now, source living in us is showing us, we had gone to Ecclesiastes 3, and in that scripture we had looked at, it showed that all things had been created beautiful in its time, but the Father set eternity in the hearts of men, which is one of the minds that we have. So all of eternity, all what is everlasting, all those things are actually set in the individual. Now, we don't see it in the physical world because it's not just for the physical person to see, because it's hidden within the individual. That's really letting us know that the kingdom and all its eternity is actually in us. And that which is in us that has created the things that's outside of us also, the things that's inside has actually brought forth that which is outside. So the physical world outside of us didn't come first. That which was inside of us came first, and then based upon the creative factor, that which is inside of us, or the only begotten Son, which we are inside of also, what all the creation came forth, and we have an outside world that we have projected, that are all of us together have projected the physical outside world. Well, before we got down to the physical world, there were other worlds. The physical world just didn't come into being. There are other worlds that we had before that. Now, in the scriptures, in Ezekiel 18, let's go to Ezekiel 18, and let's look at verse 20. It says here in verse 20, the soul that sins, it will die. Now, one thing I want us to know is that the spirit is never going to die. And the soul that sins and dies, it doesn't die a physical death. So we are looking here at a soul, that if the soul goes into a particular direction, the soul is going to die. Now, we looked at Adam and Eve, and Adam and Eve were in the earth, and they were much more advanced than us. They had another body than we do at this point, because we fell to this point right now. That's the fall of man brought us to this point. Now, Adam and Eve, they were also in the garden. And the Father said, the day that you do these things, you will die. Well, Adam didn't physically die at that point, but Adam had another death at that point. Now, we're not going to go too far in that. What I want to do is then bring up some things, and we're going to look at these bodies, and we're going to just ask ourselves some questions and have some small answers for them. Now, in Ecclesiastes, okay, let's go to Ecclesiastes 12. So we look at the soul, and we see that the soul can actually die. Okay? We go to Ecclesiastes 12, because the soul is a body too. It houses the spirit. So we look at Ecclesiastes 12. In verse 6, it says, remember your Creator before the silver cord is cut. Now, the silver cord is actually what connects the soul to the body. And when it's cut, the soul is going out that body and it's not coming back. You can go out to the astral world and you come back through that silver cord, and it's not a silver cord that is physical, but you find your way back because it's there. Once that silver cord is cut, that soul is not coming back to that body. It's out. Now, it says, before the silver cord is cut, the golden bowl is broken, and the pitcher shatters, and the fountain before the water wheel breaks at the cistern. Now, the cistern here is the physical body. It says, and the dust returns to the earth. So when the physical body is dead, it's dust, and all that is speaking about here is just different parts of it shutting down until here comes the cistern. Okay, the water wheel, or that which causes everything to flow through your body, is broken at the cistern, at the physical body. So the blood is not moving through here anymore. Everything is just boom, it's shut down. Okay. Now, when that happens, it tells us that the dust, which the physical body has been put together with, returns to the earth it came from. So this physical body that we have, it's derived, or it's made from the substance of the earth. And it says, and the spirit returns to Yahweh who gave it. Well, it sounds like an immediate thing. But if we look very carefully, we're looking at the body, the physical body that's going back to the earth. We're looking at a spirit that's moving back to the Father. Now, let's go over to Revelations 2. Now, the spirit just doesn't go back to the Father all at once. It depends on what it's doing in the earth. In Revelations 2 and verse 11, let's take a look at that. We see here, it says, he who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the called out ones of the house of Yahweh. It says, he who overcomes will not be hurt by the second death. Well, the body is dead, so that's one death. But it's telling you here, if we overcome, we don't have room, any need for a second death. So if the body is down, the physical body is down, well, we got to think about it. If something is dying, well, what is dying? What is dying? The soul has already been put down at this point, okay? And the fact that we're in the state that we're in shows that the soul also has a particular kind of death. It's not the physical death, but it's showing that. Well, there is a second death that the soul has to get past also, because the soul has to move back to its Father. The spirit is moving back to its Father, but there's a second death that has to come if we do not overcome, that we have to die to also. Now, the physical body does not house our passions and desires. It's not in that. If it was in that, when you died, the stuff that you overcame wouldn't still have to die out of you, because it would be down with the physical body already. Because the physical body goes down, and if passions and desires were all in that canister, you wouldn't have any need to overcome passions and desires again. But that's what we all need to overcome. It tells us we have to overcome the passions and desires that's in our members. Okay, well, it's in the physical body, it's housed in there, or the physical body's housing has it. Okay, like I come into my house, but if my house burns down, I didn't get burnt with the house. So the physical body, it goes down, there's still things that we have to get past. Our Father said, don't be afraid of the one who kills the body, but after the body is down, Fear the one who could still work with what you have left. Well, what's that we have left? And it could be still punished. It has to deal with the Father still, but the physical body doesn't. But that which we're now in at that point, that still has consciousness, and the Father could still deal with that. So that's what are we going to be calling that? Because that is what we call the astral body, or the desire body. So the desires and the passions move with the desire body, which is all in the astral body that we're talking about. And if we haven't lived a life that we have forgiven things and actually come to the point that we're able to let go of the passions and desires, we can't move on, as the scripture shows us in Ecclesiastes. When the body goes down, the spirit moves back to the Father. Well, that's what it's doing, but it's traveling back to the Father, because it doesn't just do it just like that. If it has things that it still has to overcome, it still has to die a second death and free itself from those emotions, which is in the emotional body or the desire body, before it starts to move on further. Of course, when it moves to the mental body, there's nothing there to really hold it. It could stay in that mental world for a little bit, but it pretty much is moving into the higher self, into that world. Now, let's go over to Revelations, okay? 20. Because we're thinking of what needs to die after the physical body is down. It's not the spirit. Because the spirit is not going to die. The spirit is housed in the soul body, and all these other bodies that we're talking about, or we have been, one is in the other, and all the way down into the physical world. It's no different than you're in a house. Well, the house is not you. You're simply in it. When you leave out of the house and you want to go down into another world, like into the ocean, you put on a scuba diving gear and you put on the things that's going to help you to go into that world. Well, that's not where you live. And the scuba diving suit is not you. You have just put it on to go into another world. If you're going to go into space, okay, where the oxygen level is not that great, you put on another suit that's going to have you move around in that world, but that suit is also not you, and neither is the physical body. That's not who you are either. In Revelations 20, and let's look at verse 6, it says, "Blessed and holy is he who has part in the first resurrection." The first resurrection are those who are redeemed from among men, because they follow the Lamb wherever the Lamb goes. The Lamb had sacrificed the passions and desires, so the desire body wasn't dealing with this individual. So everyone that followed this Lamb wherever he goes went past having to put down the desire body, because it was already put down while they lived. When they gave everything up, they put to death the passions and desires that was in their members. So here it says now, "Blessed and holy is he who has part in the first resurrection. On such, the second death, the desire body, the purging," which still needs to happen. They call it purgatory, or, purgatory, which is a purging, has no power. It can't hold that person back from moving on. If we remember Lazarus and the rich man, we saw something that was held up here. So if the person who has put everything down has nothing, the rich man had certain things because he was attached to the riches, but Lazarus didn't have anything. And so the rich man was held up, but he was in a body. When he looked over and saw those individuals in Abraham's bosom, they were in a body. And the rich man was also in a body. It says, "But they will be priests of Yahweh and of the Messiah, because they would have inherited this priesthood," which is what we call the Melchizedekian Priesthood. They come in and they go out, because now they are multidimensional, and they could function on different planes, different worlds, different levels, and they could go into different bodies. They could house themselves in all different bodies going in and out. But if they come into the physical world and they want to manifest themselves and work amongst people, well, they're going to manifest themselves in a body that is physical. It's not a human body. It looks just like it, but it's a physical kind of body. It's the body that Adam had before Adam fell, because they already have redeemed bodies. They are redeemed from among men. They are multidimensional once again, and they're going to be of the priesthood of Melchizedek, which everybody is looking about right now, which are the sons. The sons are going to be functioning in that capacity. It says, but they will be priests of Yahweh and of the Messiah, and will reign with him 1,000 years. And this 1,000 years is not a literal 1,000 years. It's a predetermined period of time that the Father has, but it's written as 1,000 years in our scriptures. Because when the scriptures are written, everything has to be brought down to a human understanding. But in the human understanding that is there is a mental understanding, there is a spiritual understanding, and there's an emotional understanding. And we have to be able to expand our consciousness to see on all those levels at the same time, because that's really what's happening. The scripture is not written in just one dimension. We could understand it physically and we could move about it in a physical manner, but it's not speaking about physical things. If you look at how Yahshua dealt with his apostles, he says at one time, he says, how could I tell you of heavenly things if you're not even understanding the earthly things? Because that's where he was going with it. He was trying to get these guys, and when he spoke, he was speaking to, I think it was Nicodemus or something like that, when these words were coming out, but he was speaking to some individuals, and he was trying to show them something. But he has to bring it down to the physical level, and for them to understand the higher level, it has to become clear to them on the physical level. Then he could actually bring them into a spiritual understanding of something that's going on. That's the physical world is simply a pattern of. Because the physical world didn't come into being all by itself. It had to come into being by a spiritual world. Okay, let's go over to Luke 20. We're going to look at Lazarus and the rich man here for just a little bit. Let's go to verse 38. We're going to look at the rich man, but we're not going to look at him just right now. It says, for he, this is Yahweh, is not the father of the dead, but of the living, cause all live to him or live in him. Okay? All, the ones who are dead, the ones who are awake, they all, the Father is not just the Father of the Hebrew people, he is the Father of all. Now, we're going to go back a little bit here. So when you're in this physical body, the true part of you is not going to die. Because the true part of you is part of the Father that has come down in all these bodies to the physical body. Well, the physical body dies, but notice, the spirit goes back to who gave it. Well, it doesn't just go straight back. It makes stops because it gets out of all these other bodies that it needs to. At least it gets out of the astral body. Because above the astral body, the mental world, okay, there is no corruption. So the individual who gets to that point could freely move in multidimensional states, no problem. And therefore, he could go back to his Father. He could come back down to this physical world. If he has nothing to overcome, he'll have no issues, because at that point, he'll be able to function like a Melchizedekian when that time actually comes. If that individual has moved to the place that everything has been put down, he would have overcome the world also, just as Yahshua. So Luke, let's go to Luke chapter 16 here. And
This is the story of the parable of Lazarus and the rich man, and we all know it. Lazarus was
This poor man,
and pretty much he died. And of course, he was a beggar also. He had nothing. I mean, there was no attachments because everything that he got, he had to beg for it. He was a beggar. He had sores all over him, so nothing was going well for Lazarus, it might have seemed. But the rich man had a lot of attachment. He lived sumptuously and all kind of stuff, and he had a lot of attachments. Well, they both died. Or they put down the physical body. Now in verse 26, it says, verse 24. So this is the rich man now. He says, then the rich man cried and said, Abraham, have mercy upon me and send Lazarus that he may dip the tip of his finger in water to cool my tongue. Now this is really not really what's happening, because if you think about it, people used to think that he's burning up and he's so hot in hell, whatever the case is. Well, a tip of water on somebody's finger on your tongue is not really going to help an individual who is burning up in hell. So it was never speaking about that. We just have to understand what's really going on. But Lazarus is in a particular body, and everything that's above the physical body is in another kind of body. Now we have to think of, if there are different heavens, and all these heavens have different glories, okay? We have to think, well, you have a first heaven, you have a second heaven, and we know there's a third heaven. That's what Scripture says. Well, what's the glory of all of those who are in these different places? Because they have bodies too. So here it says now, it says, for I am sentenced to the flame. Now this flame that he's talking about is simply putting down the passions and desires that he was attached to. He couldn't straight move on to the world that Abraham and Lazarus was in. So yes, his spirit would move on to the Father, but not straight just go on to the Father. It had to, because the Father, he is the Father of the living. When we're in a certain place, we're still considered that which is dead. If we have a lot of passions and desires attached to us, that's boggling us down. This is of the dead. So we couldn't go back and attach to the Father with that. And Lazarus, this rich man found himself in that area, so he had to take a pit stop right here and get rid of all those things, those attachments that he still had, that he hadn't gotten rid of while he was in the physical body. So Abraham, now in 5, but Abraham said, son. Now, he's not denouncing him, because yes, he's son too. Because Abraham is a symbol of all those who come to the Father. Now the Father, he's the father of the living, not the dead. Abraham, Yitzhak, Jacob, well, Abraham is the father of all those, symbolically. So Abraham said, son, remember that you in your lifetime received your blessings, while Lazarus received only evil. But now he is comforted, and you are in the place of examination, because that individual had so many things that he got attached to it. Lazarus had nothing, because that's what was played to them in this earth, and Lazarus had no attachments. Then he goes, and besides all this, there is a great separation fixed between us and you, so that those who might want to pass from this side to you, they're different bodies over there. This man has to get rid of the astral body, or put down the desires, before he could move on past that gulf into another body, of where you had Lazarus and the rich man. These are the bodies that we're talking about. But we have to grab this in order to see how the higher self is working, because all of Abraham, these guys are all dwelling in the abode of the second heaven, which is where your higher self, if you will, the Messiah consciousness, is dwelling. so that those who might want to pass from this side to you cannot, and none can come over from there to us. Well, what we're looking at is those who are in the area of Lazarus, they can't function with those because there's a separation. When it says when Messiah comes, he comes separated from sinners or separate from sinners. That doesn't mean that he hates sinners or whatever the case is. No, it means that when Messiah is coming, he's coming in you. And as he comes in you, if you and I are still holding on to these passions and desires, he comes separated from us. He comes and he's dealing with those who have put certain things down, and those of us who have not put certain things down. That spirit, that consciousness doesn't come and integrate with us if we're still there. And that's what we're looking at in this passage right here. So there's a gulf between them. Just as when Messiah comes, okay, there's going to be a gulf. And the gulf is going to separate the sheep from the goats. The sheep are those who follow Messiah wherever Messiah goes. They're going to be in Abraham's bosom, which is, I told you, the symbolic thing. And the goats who are stubborn, who did not follow, they're going to find themselves where the rich man finds himself, still trying to burn off the astral body, because that's where the passions and desires are housed in. If it was in the physical body, he wouldn't be in the state that he is right now. But the physical body died, it went down by itself, that canister's down. But the one that he finds himself living in right now, that has to go down too, or he can't move on across the gulf. So let's go over to 2 Corinthians 5. And we're going to start in verse 1. It says, "For we know if our earthly body," earthly house, "this tabernacle is destroyed, we have a building." Now, a building, he's talking about another tabernacle, another body. It's a body. If this one goes down, there is another body. It's not the spirit that's light, it's a body. Another body from Yahweh, a house made. We have a building from Yahweh, a house not made with hands. Eternal in Yahweh. Now, it's not bringing in the astral body here because it's talking to the believers who are supposed to put things down, that if they go, they're supposed to be present with Messiah. So we could be in this world right here, and if we are living the things that Messiah said to live, to be absent from this body in here is to be present with another tabernacle, in another tabernacle with Messiah. Now, if we're not living by what Messiah says and we go, we're not going to have that tabernacle. We're going to find ourselves in the tabernacle of the rich man, still needing to put certain things down because we didn't do what Messiah said in order to move across that gulf. "For indeed, in this we groan earnestly, longing to be invested in our bodies." This is a spiritual body, which is from Yahweh, another body. The body is a canister. So when the physical body goes down and the believer who will not stop for the astral body, he's moving on into dealing in the second heaven, there's a body that he has there too. A body. It's a canister that he has in that world also. "If indeed we will be found invested with a garment," because we don't have to. We could be messed up. Okay? We could be in the place that we didn't do very well. "If indeed we will be found invested with a garment," a covering, a body, "not being naked or shameful." Because when you're naked, everyone sees our shame. So this is what it means. If we don't do shameful things, yeah, we will be invested with a garment. For indeed, we who are in this tabernacle do groan, being burdened, not because we want to be divested, but to be invested, in order that this mortal body may be swallowed up by another body that is full of life. Not a body that has passions and desires in it that we have to get burned off with a second death, but a body that we have moved on to past the second death, because the second death has no power over this. So we would not get invested with an astral body, guys. We will be invested with a body that gives only life. Okay, let's go ahead and move on to 1 Corinthians 15. Let's start at verse 38. No, actually, let's go to 35. Verse 35. It says, but some may say, how are the dead raised up? Now, it's not talking about someone who has put down the physical body necessarily. Okay? It's talking about those who are in this earth that are not really conscious. You know, remember Yahshua said, let the dead bury the dead. Okay, what he's actually saying is, let those who are not aware of the things that he is talking about, let them bury the physically dead. So this now is saying, how are the dead raised up? Those who are going to bury their dead. And with what body do they come? What body do they get? How foolish. What you sow does not come to life unless it dies. We're sowing in the physical body right now, and we're dealing with an astral body. Man is made up of, I told you, 3 bodies. The physical body, the astral body, and the mental body. Well, the mental body is actually what's getting everything from the second heaven, which is the higher mental body, because that's part of the higher self. And that mental body is supposed to be able to have the desire body in line, straight in line, in that same conduit, moving straight up to the Father, because it's getting from the higher mental body. And if it has the right influence on the desire body then is actually what's putting the physical body into play. And that which comes into the physical body, the emotions and the passions and desires, as one brother said, they're not bad. All passions and desires are not bad. Well, the passions and desires that we're getting from the mental body, that's coming from the higher mental body or the higher self, those are great. If you're passionate about your father, this is actually what's coming down. It has the desire body, has nothing that is holding on to in this world because it's reaching out to the Father. Then inside this physical body, this canister that we're holding right now, okay, that we're living in, all things that we do will be to the glory of that Father that's in the third heaven. That's what we're looking at. So what we sow does not come to life unless it dies. So if we sow to death when we put down the physical body, something else, we find ourselves alive in another body that still needs to go down. But if we sow to life, we find that the second death, or the passions and desire body, doesn't have any control over us, because we, in the life that we had, like Lazarus, we put that down. So we're moving straight into Abraham's bosom. And what you sow, you do not sow the future body, but a bare grain. And when that thing grows, then you have the future, whether of wheat or of some other grain. Now in verse 38 it says, now Yahweh gives it a body. Yahweh is the one who has put all these bodies together. And how did Yahweh put it together? Yahweh put it together through the only begotten Son, bringing forth the projection of the Spirit and creating other life forms which weren't physical at the time, okay? But they had a body. Spirits were put together and they had a body. This all came out of the Son, the only begotten Son. Those spirits also took the same spirit that the Father has within itself to create and give life, and they brought forth a body that they also moved into, which is the soul body, which is actually the Messiah consciousness coming straight across, and they put together another body, okay? And this other body, you may want to call it, they call it the causal body, where the four living creatures are at. You may want to call it what they call the causal body, because that's actually what causes the Father's will to be projected in the earth. So they call it the causal body, because it causes the things that are of the Father to be brought forth in this present world. But it also has to cross that gulf. And then they did more things and moved into lower bodies all the way down until we had a physical body. The sons, okay, projected themselves. They created a physical body and they projected themselves into this body. This is Adam now. And he brought this through the environment that we have, the earth. But the body wasn't a human body that was subject to death at that time. He had to fall. And in that fall, we find ourselves in this dimension. Because the body that Adam had was the body of the multi-dimensional Son that could come and manifest itself in this world and manifest itself on any one of those different worlds or different planes that they needed a canister or a vessel or a tabernacle to dwell in all those worlds. Anyone that he chose or they chose or we chose, we had a body that we functioned in that world. And so when it says Yahweh put the body together, we're all part of that Yahweh. We're cut off now in a sense, but with what we had when we put things together with the same spirit that the Father has within himself. And all who does what the Father said to do carries that very same name, and they have the very same power of the Father to do the very same thing, because the Father gives it to them liberally because they do what he says. So now it says, now Yahweh gives it the body just as he pleases. And to each of the seed, he gives its own body. To each of these seeds. All flesh is not the same. Men have one flesh, beasts have another flesh, fish have another, and bird have another. There are also heavenly bodies, just like in the earth. There are all these different kind of bodies. It says in the heavens, there are all these kinds of bodies too. There are heavenly bodies and there are earthly bodies. The glory of the heavenly bodies is one kind. The glory of the earthly bodies is another kind. They're different kinds. Now, we're going to look at Matthew 17. We're going to look at some bodies that our scripture talks about. Okay? And these bodies have different glories and different splendors. So in Matthew chapter 17, let's look in verse 1. It says, after 6 days, Yahshua took Kepha, Jacob, and Yochanan, his brother, and brought them up unto a high mountain by themselves. Now, this was not a mountain as a piece of land that they went on. Yeah, they might have went on a little hill or something like that, and but this is not talking about that. When we got to expand our minds to understand the mountain that this is talking about, because he's dealing with these men in an area that their consciousness is being expanded, at least for a moment, that he brought them somewhere. He brought them somewhere, and this place that he brought them was a high mountain. This high mountain is when you raise yourself in consciousness to actually be in another world. But you're in this physical world. Bodily, you're in this physical world. But you have traveled, and unless you know what's going on, you don't know that you're in another world. But anyway, let's look at this a little bit, and we'll see what it's talking about. He says, so he brought them up there and was transfigured. In this place that he brought them to, this awareness, which is not physical anymore. See, they had a physical body, but where they were functioning in, the world they were functioning in, was a world that can be changed just by our imagination. And so this is the frequency that's causing the transfiguration that's going on. So he was transfigured before them. His face shone like the sun, and his clothing became as white as the light. He was in the place of having a light body. This is in the second heaven. Okay? In the second heaven, okay, which is in the holy place, when you go inside the holy place, where you're walking from east to west, you have on your right hand side the lampstand. And it says, one like the Son of Man standing in the middle of the lampstand. That's the light that's lighting up everything in the holy place. On the other side of it, you have the showbread, which is the covenant, the real covenant, which is something that we need to look at another time, but not today. But it has nothing to do with circumcising somebody to get into a covenant. Trust me, it doesn't. And then it has the altar of incense that's in front of the veil. And that's a golden altar. And that's where the prayers of the saints are lifted up, and it's moving into the most holy place. Where the Father sits at, that which inside of yourself now, because the temple is your temple. That's really what it's representing. And it's telling you how you and I could actually access our Father right inside the individual. That's why it says, greater is he who is in you. Greater is he who is in you, because the Father lives in you. Every last one of you. We got to understand that. Okay, so this is a transfiguration that's going on with Yahshua. And not only with Yahshua, but these men are dealing on a whole different frequency, so they are able to see it. It says, and behold, there appeared in their vision Moshe, and it was identified right in their minds who it was. They didn't even have to ask. Okay? And there appeared Moshe, Eliah, talking with them. So These individuals were in bodies. They had tabernacles. And they were able to be seen by the apostles. Yahshua wasn't worried about this because that was a regular thing that Yahshua did, because he had already aligned all his bodies and he was functioning through the only begotten Son possessing him. So he was doing things enormity, if you will. So here we're looking at these guys. They were in bodies, and these bodies were not physical bodies. And the apostles, they will move to a frequency that they were functioning outside of the physical body. The physical body was still there, but they were seeing things beyond what they would normally be able to see based upon the vibration or where they had come to. But what they had done was meditate. It's through a series of things that Yahshua told them to do, instructed them in, okay? And as they listened and they followed his instructions in that guided meditation, they were brought to this place. Okay, now we're going to look at the bodies that they were in. Let's go over to Hebrews, or where they went. Let's go to Hebrews 12 and verse 23. Actually, let's not go to verse 23. Let's look at verse 21. Okay, so it's talking about Moshe's experience when Moshe went up on the mountain. Okay, and then it's going a little further. In verse 21 here it says, "And so terrifying was the sight that Moshe said, I am exceedingly afraid and tremble." It says now in verse 22, "But you have come to this mountain, to Mount Zion." This is a consciousness that you in your physical body, while you're meditating, you could come to this mountain. But you have come to Mount Zion. Mount Zion is considered the highest region. It's not the highest physical city or physical mountain, but is the highest region, highest level of consciousness. "And the city of the living Father." The city, that means the Father, or the Spirit of the Father, okay, lives in that city. That means the Spirit which you come out of or you are part of lives there. And it's not hampered by the desire body, and it's not hampered by the physical body. "But you have come to Mount Zion and the city of the living Father, the heavenly Yahweh Shammah, and to an innumerable company of Malachim," messengers. They're in different bodies now, okay? "To the great gathering, namely called out, to the great gathering, namely the called out ones of the firstborn." The firstborn from the dead, you could say, or the only begotten Son, which was the firstborn, Messiah, "who was written in heaven, namely to Yahweh, the judge of all, namely the spirits of just men having been perfected." So they're not hanging out in the astral world because they have been perfected and they have moved on like Elia and Moshe to this mountain that Yahshua took them to. This is what they're dealing with. This is where they are. This is where Yahshua took them. Through the meditation, he was able to guide them right to that area. Now, we know that there are many heavens, or different heavens, okay? And so in this, let's go over to 1 Timothy. Now, these men were not in the third heaven, because the third heaven has another glory. Now, that which is of the third heaven was dwelling in the area that they were at. It was the city of the living Father. That means the Father is dwelling there. It's called Yahweh Shema. Yahweh is there. So, but let's go over to 1 Timothy here. Okay? And we're going to look at 1 Timothy chapter 6. And let's go to verse 15. There's a time that's coming when all those who have lived this particular life, they're going to actually have an experience when the spirit that is coming into the world right now, they call it the divine female energy, but really it's simply the spirit of Messiah, the Holy Spirit that is coming in. Those who know what's going on, okay, and don't want this thing to come in and cause them to lose their jobs, they are creating a lot of issues because they want to take you and I off. This is why the female movement is here, because they want to get the female to not have the protection of her head. That's the trick. Okay? Because that's what the male is. If you look at the scripture, he says, the believers, where the believers are, it says the man or the husband is the savior of the body. Now, if they fool the wife, and Messiah said to set up this thing in the earth as it is in heaven, then they really got the husband and the wife, just as they did in Adam. But that's a whole different story. We're not going to dip into that one right now. Another time we'll go there. So let's go to 1 Timothy 6. And let's look at verse 15. And his appearing will be made manifest at the proper time, by the blessed power and supreme authority, the King of kings and ruler of rulers, who has immortality, dwelling in the light, which no man in the man state, okay, which no man can approach unto, whom no man has seen nor can see, to whom honor and power everlasting. Hallelujah, Yahweh. So it says, who alone has immortality. And immortality has to be given out of this: Father, Son, only begotten Son. This is where the immortality is coming from. The Father has immortality. He gives it to the Son, that the Son may also have that very same immortality. And that which the Son is creating is eternity. But we have fallen out of source. But that which is in heaven, which is immortality, when we are waking up or we are up, we have to work for that immortality to come in the earth and create that same sense, so heaven can be experienced in the earth. That's why Yahshua says, when you pray in this manner, okay, your will be done, okay, in earth as in heaven. So now, let's look at another body. Let's go over to Jeremiah. Jeremiah chapter 1. Jeremiah chapter 1. Jeremiah chapter 1. And let's look at verse 1. I'm sorry, let's look at verse 5. Here is Jeremiah. Before I formed you in the earth, through the genetic process. That's a forming, that's a vessel. That's a vessel. Before I formed you in the womb, and you got a vessel in your mother's womb, I knew you. You weren't in the physical vessel, but you were still known.
You had another body. Remember it says, I have another tabernacle in Yahweh. That's what one of the apostles said. I have another tabernacle, another body in Yahweh. Well, so did Jeremiah. Or so does Jeremiah. And in this he says, before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. In another body, another tabernacle. Before you were born, I sanctified you in another tabernacle and appointed you, gave you a job, and sent you in here and set up everything that you would grow up, and circumstances and situations based upon what is being controlled in the heavens and what is controlled in the earth would guide and direct you, for you to wake up at a particular time, for you to have the wisdom, understanding, and knowledge of the Father, for you to put down certain things and totally wake up and go to the nations and tell them something. And I appointed you as a prophet to the nations. Appointed you. Now, if you're appointed, this is an ordination. You know, they're ordinances. So this was an ordinance that was taking place in heaven. So when it came into the earth, it could not fail. It wasn't going to fail. Because there are those who are on the heavenly realm, who has the power over here. They don't really interfere, but when they bring something in, it has to go the way that they want it to go, because their will not be thwarted. It's going to go. But Jeremiah was known in a different body. And he was sent forth into this world. He was among those who were of that holy mountain that we were talking about. He was known. And he was there in another vessel, just like Moshe and Eliah. And he was sent into the earth to be a prophet. Now let's go and look at 2 Corinthians chapter 12. And now we have different heavens. And the glory of all these heavens are different, just like the glory in the earth. And they're different bodies. Different bodies. The earth has 3 bodies. The earthly body has 3 bodies. We looked at the mental body over the past few weeks. We looked at the desire body over the past few weeks. And of course, everyone knows the physical body, because we identify with it every single day. And there's someone tell us, listen here, stop identifying with this physical body, okay, because that's really the veil. Okay, we can get beyond that. We start seeing, our consciousness starts to open, and we start seeing that it's not really what is before us. It's really what is in us. So chapter 12, verse 2. It says, more than 14 years ago, a man who was the Messiah was revealed to me. Whether he was in his physical body or outside of his physical body was not revealed to me. Yahweh was doing the revealing. This man was taken up to heaven. And this man was revealed to me, whether in his physical body or apart from his physical body, was not revealed to me. Yahweh was doing the revealing. This man was taken to the abode of Yahweh and heard unspoken words, because he was at the abode of Yahweh. The abode of Yahweh is what you would call where Yahweh dwells. The home. That's what
It is, but really the home of Yahweh is going to be what you and I prepare ourselves to house. So based upon what this man did, this man received something coming straight down into him. Now, it says he was taken to this thing simply because his consciousness has raised and he ascended. If you remember, when you go into, the priest has to ascend upon the altar to make the sacrifice. When he's going into the holy place, he has to ascend up some steps. These are all symbolic things. And this man heard unspoken words that were not possible for a man, the regular man, the man in the physical form. So he heard unspoken words that were not possible for a man, a regular individual, to speak. Now let's go over to Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy 10. And let's look at verse 14. It says, heaven and the highest heavens. Heaven and the highest heaven. And the earth and all that is in it truly belongs to Yahweh your Father. The highest heavens. Now there are different heavens. The glory of one heaven, or the body of one heaven, is not the same as that which is of another heaven. Let's go over to Psalms 148. Let's go over to Psalms 148. Praise Yahweh, you heavens of heavens. Heavens of heavens. And you waters above the heavens. Now, we read this, we look at, okay, waters above the heavens, clouds. Well, you could leave it there. But let's expand the consciousness some more to look at waters. Waters is a symbol of the creative process, which all things come forth from. But all that has a heaven above that. I mean, or the waters, I should say, the waters is above the heavens that it's talking about. So it's talking about a particular heavens, okay, which is plural. And it says, and you waters above the heavens. So there is a creative process that's above the heavens. Spirit, the blood, and the water that is above the heavens. Plural. So there are many heavens. And each one of these heavens have their own glory and their bodies in all these heavens. And one has its own splendor and one has its own glory, and they're different than each other. Let's go over to Hebrews chapter 4. Right now we're going to look at Hebrews 4 and 14. It says, seeing that we have a great high priest who has ascended into the heavens, Yahshua, the Son of Yahweh, let us hold fast our profession. The profession that we have is actually what he gave us. Go forth into all nations, tell them what I told you. Now, there are a lot of spirits that has come. Some of these spirits don't want you to do what he said. So what they want us to do, they know that we have to become purified. And so some of these spirits want us to just think about ourselves, go ahead and be purified, and just be at peace and all this. But really, that's not what he said. Yes, we got to come there, but we are not going to have we're not going to be doing what
he is telling us to do if we only go and have peace and be great all to ourselves. That's just ourselves. Who are we helping? We have to be active. There's something that we have to do. Could I read your scriptures there? Okay, Corinthians. I'll get right back to you. Chapter 12 and verse 2. This is what it says in this book right here. This is, don't know which one it is. NIV version. How about that? It says, I know a man in Messiah who 14 years ago was caught up to the third heaven. The third heaven. So we know we're looking at these three heavens. Now in this book that I have here, and in the earlier versions, or might have been the later versions of the book BOY, it did have third heaven in there. But somehow, somewhere along the line, it was taken out. But that was the translation. So we're looking at the third heaven. We're looking at the heaven that is represented in the mental level. We look at the heaven that Yahshua brought these individuals to, which he saw they were transfigured into light bodies. This is the second heaven. The light, who is in the light, this is the Father's right hand side. Because when you go into the holy place, Yahweh's faced in east, okay? And the lampstand is on the right hand side, or the south side, or the north side. The north side of the temple. That's where the light is at. But he said this man was taken to the third heavens. The third heavens now is in the most holy place, where we have the Ark of the Covenant. And there we have the book of the law, and we have Aaron's staff. Aaron's staff. Now notice Aaron's staff now is an almond staff, and it budded. But it was budded after it was cut off. That's all symbolic of telling you the power that is in that spirit that could bring life, what it could bring life to. That's all that is those symbolic things. Now the life that's in the third heaven comes down through that veil. And if we're in Messiah, we also walk through that veil. That's when Messiah died, it says. It says the veil was rent, and now you could boldly go into the most holy place, because you don't need a high priest to go once a year, because the high priest is who you are a part of the high priest's body. And the high priest enters into the third heaven, into the most holy place, which is in you. However, it's also part of a creation that is outside of you, because all of these things that's outside has been hidden inside of your heart, inside of your mind. This is why when you receive the power, you and I could create or move anything around here, move that mountain there, because that power and all that is actually housed inside the individual. Okay, so now let's go over to 1 Corinthians. Again, chapter 15. 1 Corinthians chapter 15. And we're going to pick up, we were there before, we're going to go a little further. Chapter 15, let's look at verse 41. So we read this before. It talks about the different bodies and the different heavenly bodies. Okay? And in verse 40 it says, there are heavenly bodies and there are earthly bodies, but the glory of the heavenly bodies is one kind, and the glory of the earthly bodies is one kind. But we have different heavens.
different heavens. And the different heavens have different bodies also. In verse 41, it says, the sun has one kind of glory. The moon has another, the stars another, and one stars differ from another star in glory. So also in the resurrection of the dead. Also in the resurrection of the dead. The body is sown in corruption. And when it says corruption, it's not saying that you're sown being dishonest necessarily. No, corruption is talking about this physical body that is subject to death. It doesn't have eternal life in it until it's redeemed. So it's you're sowing into this thing that is cut off somehow from the Father, the power, the life of the Father. So this is what the corruption is talking about. It's not saying that you and I are corrupt. It's talking about this thing that we have is subject to break down. Now we have an astral body also that is also subject to death. It's sown in corruption, or we're sown through that. It is sown in corruption. It is raised in incorruption. That's a whole different body it's going to have, because the body that you have now is the one that can be corrupted. It could die. But the one that you're going to have is one that won't be dying. That's another body. It is sown in dishonor. It is raised or resurrected in glory. It is sown in weakness. This weakness is the weakness of your desire mind, desire body. It is raised in power. That's the inheritance that it has. The inheritance, the power is our Father. It is sown a natural body. It is raised a spiritual body. There is a natural body and there is a spiritual body. That's for every individual. You have a natural body and you have a spiritual body. So when you leave out of here, you have another body. That's in another heaven. But after you pass out of that heaven, which is the third heaven, there is another glory that you have in another heaven. Now we're looking at all these bodies that we're dealing with. There is not just one spiritual body. We already looked at that, because after you leave this body, we found ourselves that we were in a body that wasn't physical, but it was still a spirit body. It was the astral body. And the rich man was there. That's a body, that's a spirit. It's not a physical body. We have the soul, that's also a body, and if the soul doesn't do the right thing in whatever it's housing, it dies. Not the physical death, but it still dies. Well, the soul is also functioning in its body on a spiritual level, or a spirit level. So let's go over to Romans chapter 22. Romans 8. There is no Romans 22. Romans 8 and verse 22. Let's go to verse 21. It says, because the creation itself is also delivered to the bondage of corruption. Corruption is sown in corruption. It's sown to that which is going to go. Okay? And the corruption also, if you look at it in another manner, in a mental manner or the emotional manner, you have these tendencies, or we have these tendencies about us, which is corrupt. These corrupt tendencies. But it's also talking about, look at it and expand our minds, not just in one manner, but look at it in different possibilities. So they were delivered from the bondage of corruption into the glorious liberty by the children of Yahweh. Those who are in the first resurrection which the second resurrection has no power over them. For we know that the whole creation has been groaning as in labor of childbirth right up to the present time. And not only they, but we who have the first fruits of the Spirit. This is the Spirit that is housed in different things now. Groan inwardly as we await, because the Spirit that we have, it's awaiting the adoption, the redemption of a body, which is not the physical body that we're in right now. Different bodies. Let's go down to verse 26. It says, in the same way, the Spirit, which is the Father Spirit that has moved down into all these worlds, if we're doing the right thing, this Spirit helps us in the weaknesses that we have. Which weaknesses did we look at? We looked at the weakness that's in the emotional body. The weakness that has our minds moving here and there, or our feelings moving here and there, our emotions moving here and there. This Spirit helps us in our weakness. This Spirit helps us to grab the things that are there or written or shown to us and help us to stay the course until we overcome whatever we're dealing with in our desire body. It helps us. Now we're going to go a little further, and this is probably going to be my last scripture because I'm running out of time. Okay? Let's look at Revelations chapter 14. So we're looking for the redemption of the bodies. Our bodies. Now, when you have the redemption of this body that you're looking at, it's a multi-dimensional body. It's the body you had before. As we have said many times here, you can't redeem what you never had. So you had something other than this body. And the body that you had was not subject to the astral world body. Even though you could go in through there, it wasn't subject to the weaknesses there. Because it wasn't subject to corruption. And it could move through all the levels, all the dimensions, which are different worlds, which we house them in different bodies. Whether we're ascending or descending into these lower bodies, we need a body. And we go and we house other bodies as we move. Yeah, it's the Spirit that is there, but the Spirit takes on different clothing. And it functions in different areas. And these are all different worlds. In chapter 14, let's look at verse 4. Let's look at verse 3. It says, and they sang as it were a new song. But it's not a new song. And when when them singing or they sang, it's actually talking about you and I living, how we live, how we perform in this earth. And we are singing, if we get there, if we do this thing, putting ourselves down, forgiven. This is what it means to let go. Okay? Forgive, let go. And they are performing this way of life. They're living this way of life. This is what it means by they sang. As it were a new song before the throne and before the 4 living creatures and the 24 elders. And no man could learn that song, because it's not the song necessarily that's in the written code of Moshe, except for the 144,000 And we looked at the 144,000 last week. Okay? We looked at the 24 elders. And that which the 24 elders brought down into the body of man, which is the number of 6. And those are the ones who are reigning for 1,000 years. So their courses is 1,000 years. It's not literally talking about 144,000 people. It's talking about the collective body of Eve, which has the same symbol. And they sang, this is how they live. And no one could figure out this lifestyle except for the 144,000